The first time I watched a traditional baker in rural France pull a loaf from his wood-fired oven, I couldn't understand why it looked so different. The crust was darker, thicker. The interior was dense, almost chewy. It smelled like wine and earth instead of sugar and chemicals. He handed me a slice and said, "This is what your great-grandfather ate." I bit into bread that had fermented for 3 full days using a starter older than America itself. My stomach, which had rejected every commercial bread for years, felt completely calm. No bloating, no inflammation, no digestive distress whatsoever. That's when I realized the $47 billion bread industry had convinced an entire generation that they were gluten intolerant when they were actually fermentation deficient. Medieval bread wasn't just a staple food, it was the cornerstone of European nutrition for over a millennium. The average peasant consumed between 4 to 6 pounds of bread daily, making it the primary source of calories, nutrients, and sustenance. What's remarkable is that despite this enormous consumption, medieval records show virtually no evidence of widespread digestive diseases we commonly associate with bread today. The monastery archives tell an incredible story that modern food corporations don't want you to know. In the 12th century, Benedictine monks meticulously documented their bread-making processes. These weren't quick recipes. They described elaborate fermentation protocols lasting a minimum of 72 hours. The monks weren't just baking bread, they were creating a digestive medicine through careful fermentation science they'd perfected over centuries. Archaeologists have unearthed bread ovens from the 1200s across Europe that reveal something fascinating about medieval baking technology. These ovens weren't designed for quick baking cycles. Their thick stone construction and specific thermal properties were engineered for slow-fermented, long-baked loaves that could sustain entire communities. The physical evidence matches the written records. Medieval bread production prioritized fermentation duration over production speed. When we examine historical health records, something surprising emerges. Medieval populations showed remarkably little evidence of gluten sensitivity, celiac disease, or inflammatory bowel conditions, despite consuming massive quantities of wheat products daily. The bread that formed up to 80% of their diet somehow avoided triggering the digestive epidemics we see today. This wasn't just food. Bread held sacred cultural significance across medieval Europe. Specific fermentation rituals were passed down through generations as precious inheritance. Bakers understood themselves as both craftspeople and healers, creating a food that nourished deeply rather than merely filling stomachs. Every village had dedicated bakers whose sourdough starters were considered community treasures, sometimes maintained continuously for centuries. So, what happened? How did our most ancient superfood transform into something that makes millions sick? The turning point came in 1961 with the development of what's called the Chorleywood process. British food scientists, funded by industrial bakeries, developed a radical new bread production method. Their innovation? Reducing fermentation time from the traditional 72 hours to just 2 hours through mechanical manipulation and chemical additives. This wasn't progress. It was the systematic destruction of bread's nutritional foundation. The industrial scaling that followed was staggering. Major bakeries rapidly adopted fast fermentation techniques that increased production volume by an astounding 3,500%. Profits soared as bread transformed from a slow, artisanal product into a mass, manufactured commodity. Quality and digestibility were sacrificed for volume and shelf stability. To make this new rapid-rise bread palatable and shelf-stable, the industry introduced a chemical arsenal. Today's commercial bread contains up to 47 synthetic ingredients, dough conditioners, preservatives, emulsifiers, and artificial flavors, all required to compensate for what's lost when you eliminate proper fermentation. Your great-grandparents wouldn't recognize these substances as food. The market consolidation has been relentless. Just 6 corporations now control 89% of global bread production, all using nearly identical rapid-rise methods. This consolidation hasn't improved quality or nutrition. It's standardized a fundamentally flawed production model that maximizes profit at the expense of human digestive health. Perhaps most disturbing is the systematic burial of traditional knowledge. Traditional fermentation techniques have been methodically removed from culinary school curricula and commercial baking training. An entire generation of professional bakers has been trained to believe that bread is simply flour, water, commercial yeast, and salt mixed and baked within hours, a historical aberration presented as standard practice. The scientific evidence supporting traditional bread making is overwhelming. Multiple laboratory studies demonstrate that 72-hour fermentation reduces inflammatory gluten proteins by 87% compared to the 2-hour commercial process. This isn't marketing, it's measurable biochemistry. The long fermentation physically breaks down the specific protein structures that trigger sensitivity reactions in many people. Phytic acid, an anti-nutrient found in grains that blocks mineral absorption, is another critical factor. Extended fermentation eliminates up to 96% of the phytic acid found in quick-rise bread. This means the minerals in properly fermented bread become available to your body rather than passing through unabsorbed. The nutrient profile differences are staggering. Slow fermentation increases B vitamin content by 340% and makes minerals like zinc, magnesium, and iron up to 250% more bioavailable. The living microorganisms in traditional sourdough starters are literally pre-digesting the bread for you, creating a nutritional profile completely absent from commercial products. Wild bacteria in proper sourdough starters produce specific enzymes that break down proteins in ways commercial yeast simply cannot replicate. These enzymes essentially pre-digest the complex proteins that many modern digestive systems struggle to process efficiently. It's nature's perfect system for making grain nutrients accessible to humans. Multiple peer-reviewed university studies now confirm what traditional bakers knew intuitively: authentic fermentation eliminates most gluten-related inflammatory responses. Researchers at Italy's University of Naples found that subjects with diagnosed non-celiac gluten sensitivity could consume properly fermented bread without triggering symptoms. The science isn't disputed. It's simply inconvenient for a massive industry. So why doesn't every bakery return to traditional methods? Follow the money. The global commercial bread industry generates over $200 billion annually through rapid production methods. Their entire business model depends on speed. The 2-hour fermentation allows 12 production cycles daily versus just 1 cycle every 3 days with traditional methods. When profit is the only metric, traditional methods cannot compete. The chemical dependency is by design. Fast fermentation requires approximately $15 billion in annual chemical additive sales to major bread manufacturers. These aren't optional ingredients. They're essential compensations for eliminated fermentation time. The additives represent a massive revenue stream that would vanish if traditional methods returned. Patent control further explains industry resistance. You cannot patent wild yeast or traditional fermentation methods. They're ancient human heritage. But synthetic additives, modified starches, and industrial processes, those generate recurring, patent-protected revenue streams. The business incentives all push toward complexity and away from traditional simplicity. Regulatory capture completes the picture. FDA guidelines for commercial bread are largely written by industry lobbyists, specifically favoring rapid production methods. The regulations focus on preventing obvious contamination while ignoring the more subtle nutritional degradation caused by eliminated fermentation. The system protects industry profits, not public health. But there's hope. Traditional bread making is something you can reclaim in your own kitchen. I won't pretend it's effortless. Authentic sourdough requires a 3 to 5 day initial setup and a daily feeding commitment for maintenance. But this small investment yields incredible health returns. You can acquire authentic wild yeast starters from traditional bakers or create your own from scratch using just flour and water. Online communities have preserved this knowledge despite industry efforts to obscure it. A good starter contains microorganisms that have evolved specifically to break down grain proteins efficiently. The fermentation timeline is studied non-negotiable for maximum digestive benefits. You need a minimum 24-hour bulk fermentation, but ideally 48 to 72 hours. This isn't about flavor, though that improves dramatically. It's about transforming the nutritional and digestive properties of the final product. Time is the essential ingredient industrial baking eliminated. The baking process matters too. A high-heat Dutch oven method best replicates the thermal properties of medieval stone ovens, creating the proper crust development that protects nutritional integrity. This method creates bread that stores naturally without preservatives due to its natural acidity and robust crust structure. The cost comparison makes this even more compelling. Homemade traditional bread costs approximately 75 cents per loaf versus $4 to $8 for commercial artisan alternatives that often only mimic traditional methods. The financial investment is minimal, but the health return is immense. The transformation stories are consistent and remarkable. I've documented hundreds of individuals who eliminated persistent digestive issues simply by switching from commercial to 72-hour fermented bread. People who had been told they were permanently gluten intolerant found they could enjoy bread again without symptoms. Families report remarkable health improvements, particularly in children. Parents describe behavioral issues that resolved completely after removing fast fermented bread from their children's diets. The connection between gut health and cognitive function becomes clear when you see these transformations firsthand. Medical validation continues to accumulate. Gastroenterologists increasingly confirm that many patients' symptoms disappear with traditional bread consumption. The medical community is slowly acknowledging what traditional food cultures knew inherently. Fermentation transforms food's relationship with our digestive system. The financial impact can be substantial. An average family saves approximately $2,400 annually making traditional bread versus buying commercial alternatives, while simultaneously improving their health outcomes and reducing dependence on digestive medications. Community impact extends beyond individual households. Small-town bakeries using genuinely traditional methods report customers traveling over 200 miles specifically for digestible bread. People intuitively recognize the difference once they experience it personally. What's most remarkable is that this isn't new information. It's ancient wisdom validated by modern science. Egyptian, Roman, and medieval bakers understood fermentation as essential medicine, not merely a convenience or flavor development process. Their empirical observations over generations led to bread-making protocols that modern research now proves were scientifically sound. The $200 billion annual revenue generated by commercial bread depends entirely on keeping this traditional knowledge buried. Every marketing dollar spent promoting artisan-style bread without actual fermentation time is an investment in maintaining profitable ignorance. Traditional fermentation techniques now survive primarily in isolated communities and monastery archives that preserve knowledge through centuries of industrialization. These repositories of wisdom represent our best hope for reclaiming bread as medicine rather than toxin. Your great-grandmother knew bread as medicine, not poison. The scientific evidence confirms what traditional bread cultures understood intuitively for millennia. Real bread requires time. There are no shortcuts that preserve its digestive benefits.